So what I do instead is I actually start from the assumption that I'm not going to buy the card. One of the questions I get all the time is where and how to find clean raw cards to grade. Now, I've graded thousands of cards over the past 20 years, and I'd say 98% of them were bought from eBay. So in this video, I'm going to break down the strategy behind how I look for gradable cards online, and then I'm going to show you a live demo of how to actually do this on eBay. Let's get right into it. So before we ever even get to eBay, the most important part of the grading process is card selection. We want to make sure that we're winning in the draft, because ultimately it doesn't matter how clean your card is if the PSA 10 doesn't actually add any value. So the first part of card selection is to focus on cards that have high PSA 10 upside. So I want to win big when I get the grade that I'm looking for. And this is even more important when the turnaround times are longer, because who wants to wait for 8 months to get their card back, get a PSA 10, and make like $11 on it? That sucks, right? So I want to focus on cards where I win big when I get the grade I'm looking for. And just to give you an example of this, let's consider two cards that are both $50 ungraded. We add about a $35 grading fee, so we're into each card for $85. You get a PSA 10 on both of them, and the first one sells for $150. Not bad, right? You can make a little bit of money there. But the second card sells for $350. They cost the same amount of money, the same grading fee. It takes the same time to get these cards graded, but one of them makes you way more money. So you decide which of those two you want in your order, but I know which one I'm after. And the second thing I like to do when it comes to card selection is use the historical data that's available and look at the card's gem rates. A really good site to use for this is gemrate.com, but you can see all kinds of grading data, and what I like to do is figure out which of the sets have a higher gem rate. Now, the gem rate is just like the card's historical success rate with grading. So if I send 10 cards and I get 7 PSA 10s or gem mint grades, that means my gem rate is 7 divided by 10 or 70%. So pretty straightforward. Now, it's important to know that gem rate is not a perfect metric, and it's only helpful until we can see the card in person. We've always got to trust our eyes more than historical data, because every card is unique, right? So even if you have a card that has a 100% gem rate, if your copy is ripped in half, it's definitely not going to get a PSA 10, I can promise you that. But where gem rate is really helpful is when we can't actually tell the condition perfectly online. This is going to help us focus on the sets that we're more likely to be able to find in clean gradable condition. So the simple version of this is I want cards with high PSA 10 upside and a high gem rate. And that's what I want to spend the majority of my time looking for. Now, we're never going to be perfect on this, right? Not every card's going to gem. What we're trying to do is just skew the odds in our favor. But that doesn't mean that every card we buy is going to be gradable. So some cards are going to have to be resold raw, either at cost or for a small loss. Some cards we're going to submit for grading and they're still going to come back a 9. That's okay. That's normal. That's part of the process. I only submit around 50% of the cards that I buy with the intent to grade. And that means that I'm actually reselling a lot of them raw because I just couldn't quite see the full condition of the card online. And so I encourage you, if you're grading cards, you got to think big here and look at the entire grading order as a play rather than thinking on an individual card by card basis and getting caught up on, oh, hold on, I don't want to lose on that card. Yeah, who cares if you make enough money on the 10s that it pays for everything and still leaves you with a really healthy profit. So once we've locked in on a card that has high upside and a strong gem rate, the next step is to go and find the clean looking raw copies from eBay. So just because it has a strong gem rate does not mean that every single copy is buyable. We've got to only focus in on the ones that actually look like they're well-centered, like they don't have clear and obvious flaws. And so I actually put together a checklist of some of the tips and tricks I've picked up over the years that have helped me find clean raw copies of these types of cards on eBay, and then we'll walk through a demo together. So the first thing probably sounds pretty obvious, but use the images, right? Just zoom in on them. And I find this easier to do on a phone, or if you have like an iPad or some kind of tablet where it's an even bigger screen, then you can kind of do the pinch thing and zoom in to see the pictures up close and make sure that we're not targeting a card that has a clear and obvious flaw. Now, the big thing we want to be focused on is centering, because this is the thing that we can just about always tell from the internet pictures if it's actually good enough to give us a chance. Now, PSA standard is that the front of the card has to be 55-45 or better. And so when I'm talking about centering, I'm talking about like, is the card centered on the border? And if there is no border, then we're usually looking at some of the landmarks on the card, like the team logo or the Topps logo or the player's name, and kind of looking at the margins to the left and the right. and that's how we determine whether or not the card is centered. If I'm ever not sure what ideal centering looks like, I usually like to just go and find a PSA 10 copy online and then just compare the raw copies to that one. But based on centering alone, we should be able to rip through tons of listings, and this is what speeds up the process quite a bit, because usually we can see centering clearly enough from the gallery or from the list view on eBay, where we're just holding our phone and just swiping through off center, off center, off center. Oh, this one looks good. Click into it, check the other stuff. Nope, off center, and that's kind of how fast you're going through. So you should be able to get through hundreds of cards in an hour. The next part is to look closely at the corners and the edges, and what we're looking for here are any obvious flaws, any corner touches where it's rounded or it looks like it's raised or touched. That's the type of stuff that holds a card back from getting a PSA 10. Same goes for the edges. Are they chipped? Are they nicked? Or are we seeing edges that really do go straight across that look clean all the way around the card? Now, surface is the tricky one, because this is where there's all kinds of things that can go wrong, and we can't always see them from internet pictures. So sometimes we're going to buy a card and there's going to be a surface thing on the back that we just couldn't see. But the more reps you get, the better you'll get at understanding what certain flaws look like in internet pictures. For example, a dimple might look one way in person, but it looks a different way in a scan. So you have to understand what that actually looks like to be able to spot that online. And that just comes with repetition. And once again, even with a lot of reps, it's still tricky to see everything perfectly. So you're still going to occasionally buy a card that doesn't end up being gradable. All right, so those are the basics. Now the fun stuff is where we get a little more strategic here. So if I find a card that looks clean, the next thing I want to do is click into the seller's other listings and just see what kinds of inventory they have. Now, sometimes people are going to have 100 cards and 99 of them are going to be graded, and this is going to be the only raw card that they have in their store. I don't know about you, but to me, that seems like a pretty good indication that this person knows what grading is all about, and there's probably a reason why they're selling that card raw. So that's the type of card that even if it looks clean, I may still skip. But on the flip side, if the seller only has raw inventory, or they might have just a few graded cards mixed in, but it's mostly raw stuff, that's where I'd be able to buy that card with more confidence that it's not been cherry picked for grading already. The next thing seems obvious as well, but it's also something that gets overlooked all the time, but just check the description. Sometimes there's going to be a flaw that's clearly explained in the description, but we're always just looking at the title and we're always just looking at the pictures, and we sometimes just forget about the description altogether. Another thing to look out for is cards that are being sold by consigners, and usually if you're not sure, you can look in the description of the item and it'll be pretty clear pretty quickly if it's a consignment operation. But consigners sell cards for other people, and a lot of times the people sending them cards to sell are the more savvy people in the card market who know about grading, who have already cherry picked those cards, and they just don't want to deal with the ungradable raw copies. Now, I've definitely bought cards from consigners that have come in and I've been able to grade them and get 10s, so it's not impossible, but usually I approach those cards with a little bit more skepticism. All right, another thing I like to do when I'm in the search results, eBay will default to the best match view, and that's not always the best match for you. So what I like to do is swap to the newly listed view, which shows me the newest listed items first. And that way I'm looking at cards that haven't been on eBay as long, that are less likely to have already been looked at for grading by other potential graders. One more thing with the search results, when I'm looking for a card, I like to focus on one design at a time. So for example, if I'm looking at a football player and I've got Topps Chrome, I've got Prism, and I'm putting those both in the same search, and I'm constantly having to bounce back and forth, Topps Chrome to Prism to Topps Chrome again, that makes my brain have to switch back and forth over and over and over again. And every time it switches to remind itself, okay, this is the design, this is the centering for this card, this is what I need to be looking out for. There is time that is wasted there. We're far more efficient if we can just get into the flow. And so I like to just look at one design at a time and just pull up the Topps Chrome and go through the entire search results for Topps Chrome and then switch to Prism. And that way you just know exactly what you're looking for rather than having to constantly bounce back and forth. Now I've got two last things mindset wise, and then we'll get into the demo. So the first one is we just don't want to spend hours and hours and hours looking at each individual card. This should be a very quick process. We want to eliminate cards as quickly as we can, find the ones that are clean, buy them or add them to your watch list, but then move on. So we shouldn't be sitting there inspecting and measuring every single card. You're never going to make any progress if you're taking 25 minutes to evaluate whether or not to even bid on a card. Now you'll definitely be slower up front if it's your first time doing this compared to after you've got 1,000 reps, but it still shouldn't be a painfully slow process here. Okay, and finally, this is a shift that I made a few years ago that's really helped me be more efficient, but A lot of times newer graders want the card to be gradable. So we go into a card, we click into it, and we're like looking for all the reasons why we should buy it. And when we're doing that, we end up starting to justify the flaws. And we say, well, that's not that bad. And the centering's just only a little bit off. And so you end up buying cards that actually don't look that clean if you're being objective about it. So what I do instead is I actually start from the assumption that I'm not going to buy the card unless the card proves itself truly worthy. And so it's the difference between justifying flaws versus going into a card expecting not to buy it and saying, well, hold on, the centering actually does look pretty good. And actually, I can't find any issues with the corners, and this seller doesn't look like they grade cards. So you run out of reasons not to buy the card rather than looking for reasons to buy the card. And what this has done is help me improve my success rate so I'm able to grade more of the cards that I buy rather than buying stuff that I end up just liquidating raw. All right, so now you understand some of the why behind what I'm about to show you. And let's dive into the demo and we can walk through this together. Now remember, the first step is card selection. We want to win in the draft. So there are lots of ways to do this, but my favorite way is to use Coin. This is my software that I built specifically for this purpose. And by the way, if you want to follow along, I will leave a link in the description where you can take a free trial and try Coin for free. But this is where we're going to start honing in on which cards to go after. So I'm going to start off by adding a couple of filters here. So the first one is gem rate. I like gem rates that are greater than 50%. This helps us target cards that are just a little bit easier to grade. And then I'm going to add a second filter for PSA 10 margin. So that's like the amount of margin that's created by the PSA 10 grade. And let's say I want this greater than $300. So this is going to give us cards where we're going to actually make some pretty decent money if we get a 10 grade. So once we narrow down the list, it's time to pick a card. So let's say we go after this Shohei Ohtani card, this Bowman's Best Pixel Portraits card. So you can see the PSA 10 multiplier, the raw price, the graded price here, the gem rate. So it's got all the data points that you would want in one place. But the reason why I like Ohtani especially right now is because with longer turnaround times, that leaves a lot of space and a lot of time for things to happen in the market. And the last thing that we want is to send off a card to be graded just to have the value of that card fall while it's sitting there waiting for PSA to grade it. So for example, if we're looking at this Jackson Dart card down here, we buy this and we send it off to PSA, and then he's just terrible during the football season. He's a less proven name. His floor is far lower than a guy like Ohtani, who's already going to be a Hall of Famer if he retired today. So Ohtani's cards aren't going to be nearly as volatile as a guy like Dart, who is just a less proven player. So that's why I like going after these more established names when we have longer turnaround times. So from here, all I do is click the eBay link and I'm off to eBay to search for the clean copies of this card. Now, if we go back, we can see our raw price is around 130 bucks. Now, a lot of times people are going to be priced higher than that, and we're going to have to make some offers here, or we're going to have to wait for an auction to end to actually get that price. Looks like this one's actually a hair above that price already. The thing about this is when we're targeting the clean copies of cards, those ones tend to go for a little bit more money than the ones that look off-centered or have a beat-up corner. And so that's the thing that we've got to keep in mind, is we might actually have to pay a hair higher if we want to lock in one of these clean copies. The good news is that's okay, because there's $300+ of PSA 10 margin here. So the first thing I'm doing here is I'm going to go to the ones that are newly listed, like we like to do. And so now we're looking at the ones that have been most recently listed that are less likely to have already been picked over. The thing that's tricky about this card is it doesn't have a clean border that goes all the way around the card. And so if I click into this one, I'm going to have to figure out what's the actual centering like. And for this, the clear thing to look at to me is going to be the name here, Ohtani. So I want the space from the left of the O to the edge of the card to be about the same as the bottom of his name to the bottom of the card. And to me, this actually looks pretty clean. It looks pretty centered. You can't really tell on the other side because there's nothing to go off of. There's no logo or anything to go off of on this side. And when you get to the back of the card, you look at the text like this and you say, okay, is the margin between the end of the font to the side of the card the same on that side as it is on this side? Looks relatively close. But hold on, there's a third picture here, and we've got a clear and obvious ding that this seller is being kind enough to be honest about. So this is a card that I'm immediately not going to buy, so I'm on to the next one. Now remember, the other thing I can do here if I'm not sure about the centering of a card, I can go into a site like 130 Point and see if I can find an Ohtani Best Pixel PSA 10. So we find a PSA 10 copy. All right, so I like this one because it's a nice clean scan. So we click into this. All we have to do is click see original listing, and then we can see, okay, here's the actual centering. And you can see it's kind of that what we were talking about, where the Ohtani to the left and the Ohtani to the bottom of the card are roughly the same. On the back side, you can see kind of the centering here too. And that looks very similar to that copy that we just looked at. But so I think we're judging the centering the right way, and we just need to look at more copies of this card. So let's open this one, let's open this one, let's open this one, and we'll see what we can find. This one, right off the bat, quick consign, pretty good clue that this is a consignment operation, right? And it doesn't mean that this card isn't going to be gradable. It just means that I'm gonna approach it with a little bit more skepticism from a condition standpoint. Now, I actually don't immediately see anything that makes me think that this isn't clean. So I might go and check the listing. Usually for a consignment company, you're gonna get pretty much just canned terms down here, which is exactly what this looks like. And so I don't get a whole lot of help on this one, but this does look pretty clean to me. So I may look at this and at least just add it to my watch list here. Next one, another consignment operation, DC Sports. They do a great job. However, they are also a consignment shop. So same thing, we're still being a little bit more skeptical. Now, what I see on this one is this back left edge. See how that's kind of frayed, and there's a lot more white showing on this one compared to those other copies. This looks like it's not as clean of a cut. So for that reason, I'm probably going to skip this copy. And so let me get back to where I was. Oh, I think I skipped this one. This one, here we go. So here's another example. Now this looks like a seller who, let's check their other listings and see what they've got. They are priced a little bit above eBay, so I would have to feel really confident about this card before I bought this. But look at this, they don't have any graded cards in their store whatsoever. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying there's people out there that just don't grade. You can sometimes find folks like this that are happy to just take the money for the cards raw and move on. So looks like that person might have done some breaking, and so this might just have come directly from a pack. And so looking here, I see a little spot up there that looks like the type of thing that could just be dust that you can easily wipe off, but it's hard to tell for sure. Down here, there's a little bit of a fray in the bottom right corner though, so I actually don't like this card for that reason too. And so when you're thinking through this, if you're looking online and you can't see everything perfectly, and you're already seeing a couple of different areas, this spot on the back here, there's another one up here. If I zoom, you can see this kind of little spot that looks like it could be a nick in the edge. And then this corner kind of juts out a little bit here. Those are the types of things that if I can already see 3 different things online, I can't even see the card perfectly, but that gives me a lot less confidence that it's going to be clean, even though this person looks like they don't grade cards. So too bad, because otherwise that might have been a good one to go after. Let's do a couple more here and we'll see if we can find one that looks halfway decent to add to our list. Here's another consignment one, so I'm going to skip that one right off the bat. So I'm looking at this one, and the bottom right corner to me looks like there's some white showing down here. So that's a clear and obvious spot that I don't want to buy. They've also listed the card as excellent, which is actually not excellent. It's the condition below near mint, which is the highest condition on eBay. So if you see things listed as near mint, that typically means that they're in the cleanest condition. Now, some sellers are going to be a little bit conservative here, and they're going to list all their cards in excellent condition. All right, here's another one. And this looks like a seller that is not a consigner, which is cool. This card looks relatively clean to me. The centering looks fine based on that bottom logo. I don't see any issues immediately here. Maybe a tiny little touch down there in that corner. That one actually looks a little bit rounded to me too though. So both of those, I'm kind of out on this card right off the bat. I don't need to see his other listings. So far, we've only found 1, maybe 2 cards that are worth actually considering here. This is another consignment one, and these ones are ones where we'll probably have to make best offers. You see there's a bunch of these from consignment. Let's dig into a couple of these and see if we can find one to make an offer on. So this person's name is the Slab Lab, so I don't even feel like I necessarily need to look at their store to know that they're going to have some graded stuff in here. And sure enough, they do. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's picked over, but there's a pretty good chance. I don't know if that's your name. And sure enough, in the top right corner, we see a pretty obvious ding there. So this is another one that you can pretty quickly skip. Sorry, Slab Lab. All right, this one. Now I like this because it's on a dark background and you can already see there's no white on the corners here, at least on the front. Same thing actually goes on the back here. I don't see any issues with this. Maybe a tiny little touch there. It's hard to tell if that's just the way that the picture came out because the picture itself is a little bit blurry, but this one actually looks pretty solid to me. So let's check the seller's other listings and see what we're working with here. Bunch of Otani, nothing great. Well, here's one graded card. It's from all the way back in 21 though. So this person looks like they might dabble in graded cards, but they don't necessarily grade themselves is how I would interpret this particular store. They've got maybe 10% of their store looks like it's graded stuff. They've got some SGC mixed in here. So I wouldn't have a ton of concern that this is super picked over. And so that's the type of card that I'd be throwing in an offer and seeing if we can get closer to that 130 to 150 range that we're looking for. So I like doing this better on my phone because once again, you can just kind of scroll through them a lot faster versus clicking into them on a computer like this. But for the sake of this demo, hopefully you can at least see there's a bunch of different cards that are listed, but a lot of them we're going to eliminate really quickly once we find a flaw with them. And the thing to keep in mind here is cards don't have to be completely immaculate perfect. Even a PSA 10 can have a few tiny little imperfections. You just don't get that much leeway. And so if I'm already seeing multiple issues, that's usually a card I'd rather just pass on until I can find the next clean card that's going to give me a stronger chance at a 10. I'd rather live to fight another day and save my money compared to forcing it on a card that really doesn't look as clean as it needs to be. All right, let's do one more example real quick. And so I'm actually going to show you the Pokemon list inside of Coin, and don't knock it till you try it. A lot of the grading metrics on Pokemon right now are crazy. So I'm going to actually target this birthday Pikachu holo from 2021. And the thing about grading, by the way, if you're looking at this and rolling your eyes like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to show me some cartoon nonsense here. Guys, it doesn't matter. If the card is gradable, it's gradable. And the same skill set that you learn for sports can be applied to other categories. And I don't know about you, but if the money's there and I'm grading to make money, it doesn't matter if it's baseball, basketball, football, WNBA, hockey, soccer, Pokemon, whatever it is. If I can make good money on that card and I'm confident in the numbers and I'm confident in the condition, I'm not opposed to any category if the numbers make sense here. So I'm going to dig into this birthday Pikachu. We'll go to eBay and we'll look and see if we can find a clean copy or two. So here we are, and once again, my favorite thing to do is to start by going for the newly listed cards. So we can see there's a bunch of graded copies here, and one of my favorite things to do is just throw in a minus PSA, and this will actually remove all of the graded copies, and we can see just the raw stuff here, or I guess I need to get rid of this other grading company too, but this should be enough for us to start with. So let's open a couple of these. This one looks like it's a little bit higher than this one. And if we go back to Coin, we can see the numbers. So 40 bucks or so raw is pretty standard. And we're looking for 300 plus as a PSA 10. So really solid numbers if we can find a clean copy or two of this card. Now, the thing that's nice about Pokemon stuff is they mostly have the same design, and almost all of them have clean borders that go around the card. So it's a lot easier to tell the centering compared to some of the sports stuff that doesn't always have a border. So this one actually looks pretty good if you compare the right side to the left side. Pretty close to even. If you compare the top to the bottom might be a little bit heavy, but it's actually not that bad from what I can tell. And then the back of this card actually looks pretty clean too. And maybe you've got a little bit of chipping up here. So that to me is the stopper. You see that white spot here, and then there's another little white spot here, some kind of more minor ones there. But this right here, another spot. So that's what I'm looking for on the backs of these cards is if you see any kind of white that very clearly shows through on the edges or on the corners, that's oftentimes going to be a stopper for Pokemon stuff. All right, next one. This one is probably a little bit bottom heavy as well. So I don't think that this one's close enough. The other one was, but this one to me doesn't look close enough. So I'm going to skip that one. This one's way overpriced and looks a little top heavy to me. So I'm going to skip that one as well. Let's try this one. This one is way bottom heavy, so I don't need that one either. Try this one. This one's heavy left to right. Okay, now this one actually looks pretty good to me from a centering standpoint. Now the problem here is we only have a picture of the front of the card, so we can't actually check the back. And so this is an example of a card where I'd just send the seller a simple message saying, hey, do you mind sending over a picture of the back of the card? All right, a couple of other examples here. This one looks off bottom to top, where you see how the bottom is a lot thicker than the top. This one doesn't look horrible to me, although this might be the lighting. It's hard to tell if this corner is touched or if that's just the lighting, but this one actually looks pretty clean. Otherwise, I don't see any of that whitening around the border or on the corners. So this one looks pretty clean. Now I might ask about that corner and just see, hey, is this glare? Is this just the way that the card was angled, or is that corner actually lifted? Because if that's lifted, that's a clear and obvious stopper. But otherwise, I don't really see anything on here that would make me think that this card can't get a 10. So good time to check down here, near mint to mint unless otherwise noted. So that sounds good. And then let's check his other items to see if he has a bunch of graded stuff in here. Looks like one graded card, maybe two graded cards, tons and tons of raw. So this is the type of seller where not only could you potentially bid on that one card, but you might even look at his other listings and say, hey, okay, some of these other cards actually look pretty clean too, and end up picking up multiple cards from the same seller. So that's an example of one that I would add to my watch list. I'd probably send him a quick message and just ask about that corner, saying something like, hey, interested in this card, but I couldn't tell if this was a flaw or if it was just the lighting. Could you either send another picture or help me with what's going on with the top front left corner? And so you see here, the theme is that we're going through lots of cards. We're going through relatively quickly. Again, it's easier on the phone because you can see the centering up close and just kind of swipe and you're getting through cards a lot faster than what I was just able to to do. But it's that simple though. We're going through, we're checking to see what does condition look like, what does the centering look like. As soon as I find something that's going to eliminate it, I want to get on to the next card and not waste any more time there. And so we were able to find a couple of copies of these cards that looked like they were clean enough to bid on, but you'll notice that we went through multiple copies before we found those. So I want to encourage you, they are out there, but it does take work to find the clean raw cards. And so not every single card is going to be a PSA 10, but the way I think about this, every time we buy a card, it's basically like taking a shot on goal. And so some of the time we're going to miss, we're going to buy cards that end up needing to be liquidated raw. That's just part of the process. But some of the times we are going to hit and we're going to find a really clean copy of a card that we can submit for grading and get a PSA 10. Now, the thing to remember is we can't score if we never shoot. So if we're always looking for just the absolute most perfect card of all time, they're out there, but those are going to be extremely difficult to find. We have to just find cards that look like they're clean enough to at least have a chance at a 10. And that's usually my starting point here. The other thing that's important is, once again, we want to target big upside, because the bigger the upside, the more risk I'm willing to take, because we don't need to hit on very many of those cards to be able to more than make up for any of the misses. So remember, we can't guarantee PSA 10s, especially when we're buying cards online, but we can do some of these simple things to improve our odds. And the other thing is, the more work we do on the front end evaluating cards and being careful to eliminate the ones that are clearly not going to be gradable, the easier we make things on ourselves later. The clean raw cards are still out there, it just takes work to find them. Now, if you're someone who's trying to learn the grading game, we talk all about this in my card investing community, Ignite. We'd love to see you inside. I'll leave a link in the description with full details to Ignite, as well as a link to a free 7-day trial if you want to try coin. But otherwise, we'll see you on the next video.